It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when I heard the sharp, insistent knock on my front door. The sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the living room, but as I approached the door, an uneasy feeling crept into my stomach. I opened it to find two sharply dressed individuals standing on my porch, their expressions serious and demanding. They were members of the Homeowners Association, or so they claimed, waving what appeared to be official-looking badges. At first glance, they seemed to embody authority, exuding a confidence that felt unsettling. With their polished shoes and neatly pressed clothes, they presented an image of professionalism that made my heart race. However, there was something about their demeanor that set off alarm bells in my mind. Their eyes flickered with a hint of arrogance, a sense of entitlement that hinted at their true intentions. "Good afternoon," one of them began, his voice smooth but laced with an underlying threat. "We're here regarding some outstanding fines associated with your property." He held up a piece of paper as if it were a legitimate document. The second member nodded in agreement, reinforcing the gravity of the situation with a stern expression. As they launched into their spiel about alleged violations, fines for imaginary rules I supposedly broke, I struggled to keep my composure. They rattled off claims about unapproved landscaping changes and noise complaints, all fabricated scenarios designed to intimidate me into submission. My mind raced as I listened to their accusations. None of it made sense. My property was well maintained, and I was conscientious about adhering to HOA guidelines. Yet here they were, attempting to bully me into handing over money for fines that didn't exist. They leaned closer as they spoke, invading my personal space and employing scare tactics that felt almost theatrical. "If you don't settle this today," the first member warned ominously, "we'll have no choice but to escalate this matter. You could face legal action or even arrest." The mention of arrest sent chills down my spine. I had dealt with real criminals in my line of work. Intimidation tactics were all too familiar. While they believed they had found an easy mark in me, a homeowner unsuspecting of such dubious practices, I remained calm beneath their pressure. Years of experience in law enforcement had prepared me for confrontations like this one. As the confrontation escalated, I noticed subtle shifts in their behavior. The confident bravado began to waver as I stood my ground. Each accusation became more desperate, and I could see their facades starting to crack under the weight of their lies. They exchanged furtive glances as if debating how to proceed when things took a turn for the worse. I could feel the tension in the air thickening as they sensed their plan unraveling. Their body language shifted from aggressive posturing to nervous fidgeting. It was as if they were realizing they had underestimated me entirely. They attempted to maintain their facade of authority by brandishing their fake credentials more vigorously, but it only reinforced what I already knew. They were nothing but scammers trying to exploit fear. At that moment, everything changed. Their theatrics and intimidation tactics had failed to elicit the response they expected from me. Instead of cracking under pressure, I reached for my wallet and slowly pulled out my real federal badge, a symbol of genuine authority and years of dedicated service in law enforcement. The look on their faces was priceless. Disbelief washed over them as panic set in. The smug confidence that had characterized our encounter moments before transformed into sheer terror as I calmly revealed who I truly was. Watching their expressions morph from arrogance to fear was a moment I will never forget. The confrontation had not only exposed their fraudulent scheme, but also reminded me of the importance of vigilance against those who would seek to exploit others through intimidation and deceit. It was a lesson learned, not just for them, but for anyone who might find themselves facing similar circumstances in the future. Authority can be both real and counterfeit. Recognizing the difference is crucial in protecting oneself from scams like theirs. As the two HOA board members stood on my porch, their initial claims about unpaid fines began to unfold in a manner that felt increasingly dubious. They waved their fake badges with an air of authority, trying to establish credibility, but the more they talked, the more their story seemed to unravel. Their accusations were vague and lacked any specific details that would make them believable. It became clear that they were not just misinformed, they were outright deceitful. One of the board members leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as he spoke. "You don't want this to escalate," he warned, his eyes narrowing. "We have the means to take legal action against you if you refuse to comply." With each word, he attempted to weave a narrative of urgency and fear. He emphasized the necessity of immediate payment, claiming that any delay could result in further consequences, such as fines doubling or even loss of property rights. I couldn't help but notice how their tactics relied heavily on intimidation. They painted a bleak picture of what would happen if I didn't pay up. Threats of legal trouble loomed large in their discourse. They tossed around phrases like court summons and repossession with alarming frequency, yet all I could think about was how absurd their claims were. I had lived in this neighborhood for years and had always been diligent about following the community rules. As they continued their aggressive pitch, they pulled out a clipboard filled with documents that they claimed were official notices. Flipping through the pages, they pointed out supposed violations with an exaggerated sense of urgency. "See here, you've been fined for noncompliance with landscaping regulations," one of them insisted, pointing to an empty space on the paper where handwriting could easily be filled in later. I scanned the pages quickly and found nothing that made sense. It was all smoke and mirrors. The second board member chimed in, attempting to bolster his partner's claims with fabricated anecdotes. "Just last week, we had another resident who ignored our warnings," he said dramatically. "He faced serious repercussions for his defiance. The implication was clear: if I didn't want to end up like that hypothetical resident, facing dire consequences, I needed to pay them immediately." Their demeanor shifted as they sensed my hesitance. Confident bravado began to slip away, replaced by frustration masked as urgency. "This is your last chance," the first member declared, leaning forward as if to physically intimidate me into compliance. "You either pay today or face serious repercussions tomorrow." It felt like watching a bad performance where the actors were becoming increasingly desperate as they realized their audience wasn't buying into their act. The pressure was palpable as they attempted to corner me emotionally and psychologically. They leaned on scare tactics that had worked for them before, strategies designed to exploit fear and panic in unsuspecting victims who might not know their rights or feel empowered enough to stand up against such intimidation. I could see how someone less experienced might have crumbled under their relentless barrage. But this was not my first rodeo. I had encountered many scams throughout my career in law enforcement. It was hard for me not to feel a sense of pity for them beneath my growing irritation. They truly believed they could manipulate me into handing over cash on the spot without any proof or legitimacy behind their claims. As I stood there listening to their escalating threats, I noticed subtle shifts in their body language. The bravado that initially marked their approach started to evaporate as they realized that I wasn't responding as expected. Their eyes darted between each other, and there was a palpable tension hanging in the air, the kind you feel when a well-laid plan begins to crumble under scrutiny. I could see them weighing their options, perhaps considering a quick exit if things went sideways. The dramatic getaway they had planned now seemed increasingly likely as desperation settled in. Little did they know that I was far from intimidated. I was simply waiting for the right moment to expose their charade. In those moments, as the scam unfolded before my eyes, it became clear that these self-proclaimed enforcers of community rules had underestimated not only me, but the potential consequences of their actions. What started as a tense confrontation was about to take a turn neither of us could have anticipated, a revelation that would turn the tables completely and expose them for who they truly were: scammers masquerading as authority figures. As I stood there facing the two aggressive HOA board members, my mind briefly drifted to my background, my years of experience as a federal agent. It was a journey that had equipped me with the skills necessary to recognize deception, discern truth from lies, and navigate high-pressure situations with clarity and confidence. The training I had undergone was intense, ranging from investigative techniques to negotiation tactics, all designed to prepare agents for the unpredictable nature of real-life confrontations. I had spent over a decade in various roles within law enforcement, tackling everything from financial crimes to organized fraud. During that time, I had encountered countless scammers and swindlers who employed similar tactics to those being used against me now. Over the years, I learned to read people, to identify subtle cues in their behavior that could reveal their true intentions. It was this experience that allowed me to remain calm in the face of intimidation. My career had taken me through various assignments, including undercover operations where I infiltrated criminal organizations. Those experiences were harrowing and often dangerous, but they instilled in me an unwavering sense of justice. My work wasn't just about upholding the law, it was about protecting innocent people from those who would exploit them for personal gain. The thought of someone trying to manipulate me now felt infuriating. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I remembered a particularly challenging case involving a real estate scam that targeted vulnerable homeowners. A group of con artists misled families into believing they owed exorbitant fees for non-existent services. Many were elderly residents who didn't have the knowledge or resources to fight back. Witnessing their fear and confusion fueled my commitment to combating fraud in all its forms. In moments like those, I vowed never to let fear silence anyone again. As I faced these imposters at my door, I recognized this situation as strikingly similar. They were trying to leverage fear, the same fear I had seen break down the most resolute individuals, hoping it would force compliance without question. But experience had taught me that fear is often the tool of those who lack real authority or legitimacy. These board members were no different. They were using intimidation as a weapon because they knew their claims were hollow. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I recalled the myriad of techniques I'd honed over the years. How to maintain composure under pressure, how to ask probing questions that reveal inconsistencies in stories, and how to assert authority when faced with aggression. In this moment, my training kicked in as I evaluated every word that fell from their lips and every gesture they made. While they attempted to portray themselves as enforcers of community standards, I knew they were nothing more than petty criminals using fake credentials and fraudulent claims to extract money from unsuspecting homeowners. Each accusation they hurled at me was baseless and lacked any supporting evidence, a fact that only stoked my determination further. I also reflected on the interactions I'd had with individuals battling similar scams in the community. Those experiences had reinforced my belief in empowerment through knowledge. It became clear that many people didn't know their rights or how to stand up against such unscrupulous tactics. If these board members thought they could take advantage of me due to my status as a homeowner, they were gravely mistaken. The skills I possessed weren't just professional tools, they represented a commitment to justice that transcended my career. They embodied my belief that everyone deserves protection against exploitation, especially those who might not have the means or knowledge to defend themselves. In this moment of confrontation at my doorstep, I realized I wasn't just facing off against two wannabe enforcers. I was standing up for every person who had ever been bullied or intimidated into compliance by someone wielding false authority. My heart raced not out of fear, but out of anticipation for what was about to unfold. This was not only a chance for me to protect myself, but also an opportunity to expose their scheme and ensure that they could no longer prey on others with impunity. It was clear that the tables were about to turn dramatically. Armed with my background and unwavering resolve, I prepared myself for what came next, an unveiling of truth that would bring their bluff crashing down around them. As the confrontation continued at my doorstep, the tension in the air became almost palpable. The two HOA board members, sensing that their initial intimidation tactics were failing to elicit the desired response, began to escalate their aggression. Their voices grew louder, and I could see their confidence waver as they leaned into their roles as self-appointed enforcers of community regulations. "Listen," the first member said, his tone sharp and demanding. "You need to understand that we have authority here. You can't just ignore these fines and think there won't be consequences." He stepped closer, invading my personal space in an attempt to assert dominance over the situation. His body language was aggressive, and I could sense that he was trying to intimidate me into submission. The second board member chimed in, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you don't pay this fine today, we'll have no choice but to take legal action against you. You'll be facing a court summons before you know it." He waved the clipboard in front of me, filled with empty threats and fabricated rules, as if it were a magic wand that could conjure real authority out of thin air. I could see the desperation behind their bravado. They had expected me to crumble under pressure, to panic at the thought of legal trouble and potential consequences. But instead of feeling frightened or cornered, I remained calm and composed. Years of experience in law enforcement had taught me that staying grounded was key in high-pressure situations like this one. As they continued their tirade, I noted how frequently they shifted their narrative. One moment they were threats of fines, the next they hinted at arrest as if it were a casual afterthought. It was almost comical how transparent their tactics had become, like watching a poorly rehearsed play where the actors forgot their lines midway through. Their claims felt increasingly absurd, especially considering that none of them had any tangible evidence to support their accusations. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing moment. I could feel my heart rate quicken, not from fear but from anticipation. This was a pivotal moment. I realized the power dynamics were shifting more dramatically than I had anticipated. They were beginning to panic themselves as their facades started crumbling under scrutiny. I could see it in their eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that betrayed their bravado. In an effort to regain control over the situation, the first board member raised his voice further, almost shouting now. "You think you can just ignore us? We'll have our lawyers contact you if necessary. This isn't a game." His frustration was evident, and while he tried to maintain an air of authority, I recognized how desperate he had become. I stood firm, refusing to let their intimidation tactics affect me. Instead, I focused on maintaining a steady gaze and a calm demeanor, reminding myself that I held the upper hand, one they couldn't begin to comprehend. Their bluster was mere posturing. They lacked any real authority or legal backing for what they were claiming. As my resolve solidified, I noticed them exchanging furtive glances, a silent communication conveying their growing concern. They had likely encountered homeowners who folded under pressure before. It was clear they weren't accustomed to being challenged so directly. Their plan was unraveling before their eyes. Then came a moment that felt like it stretched on for an eternity. The second board member glanced back at his partner with a look of uncertainty before turning back toward me with a newfound urgency in his voice. He hesitated, clearly sensing his scheme was collapsing around him. Sometimes, timing changes everything, just like subscribing to this channel seems to mysteriously repel HOA scams. At least that's what subscribers swear by in the comments. But back to the story, watching his uncertainty grow, I prepared myself for the final reveal, knowing their false authority was about to crumble entirely. "Look, we can work something out," he stammered, attempting to pivot away from confrontation in light of my unwavering posture. But it was too late for negotiation. They had crossed a line by trying to bully me into compliance without any legitimate basis for their claims. I could sense that desperation taking hold of them, a realization that their scam might not only fail but also expose them for who they truly were, imposters playing at authority. In that instant, it became clear that this confrontation was about more than just bogus fines. It represented a clash between genuine authority and fraudulent pretense. The tension reached its peak as I prepared for what would come next, the moment when my true identity would shift everything in this confrontation and expose their entire scheme for all it's worth. With every ounce of composure I had built up over years of experience in law enforcement, I knew it was time to turn the tables completely, time for them to witness firsthand what happens when someone refuses to be intimidated by those who wield false power. The moment had arrived, and the tension in the air was thick with anticipation. As the two HOA board members continued their attempts to intimidate me, a calm resolve settled within me. I could sense that their confidence was evaporating, replaced by desperation as they realized their threats were falling flat. It was time to turn the tables. With a deliberate motion, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my federal badge. The glimmer of the metal caught the light, and for a brief moment, everything around us faded into the background. I could see their eyes widen in shock as they registered what was happening. This was not just any confrontation. It was about to become a dramatic revelation. I flipped open my badge slowly, allowing them to take in the official insignia that signified years of dedicated service in law enforcement. "You see," I said, my voice steady and authoritative, "this is a real badge, something you clearly lack." The words hung in the air, resonating with an unwavering certainty that pierced through their web of lies. The first board member's mouth dropped open in disbelief, his bravado crumbling like a house of cards. You're a federal agent." He stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The shift in his demeanor was nothing short of astonishing. The smug confidence he had exuded just moments ago was replaced by sheer panic. It was as if I had reached into the very heart of their scheme and exposed its core. The second board member took a step back, glancing nervously at his partner before darting his eyes around, searching for an escape route that wasn't there. They had come to my door expecting compliance through intimidation, but now they stood before someone who had dedicated their life to upholding justice, a stark contrast to the fraudulent authority they had tried to wield. I continued, speaking with calm conviction. "You both thought you could bully me into handing over money for fines that don't exist. But here's the thing. I know how scams work, and I've seen far worse than what you're trying to pull off today." My words were measured but firm, each syllable underscoring the reality of their predicament. Watching their expressions transform from arrogance to horror was unforgettable. The first board member's face paled as he struggled to regain composure. "We didn't mean any harm," he blurted out, desperation creeping into his tone as he tried to salvage what little dignity he had left. It was clear they were grasping at straws, hoping for some semblance of control when none remained. I stepped forward slightly, maintaining eye contact with both of them. "This isn't just about fines or unpaid dues," I explained. "This is about exploiting vulnerable homeowners and using fear as a weapon. You have no idea how wrong you are." My resolve only strengthened as they squirmed under my gaze. With each passing second, I could feel their facade crumbling further, a once confident act now reduced to sheer panic as reality set in. They were caught in a web of their own making, and there would be no easy way out for them this time. I could almost sense the realization dawning on them. They had underestimated not only me but also the consequences of their actions. "Listen," the second board member pleaded, his voice trembling slightly now. We can work something out. We didn't think anyone would challenge us. The desperation seeped into every word he uttered. It was clear they were now trying to negotiate a way out of their impending downfall, but there would be no negotiation here. The time for fear-mongering and deceit had ended. It was time for accountability. You need to understand that this behavior will not be tolerated, I stated firmly. I'm going to report this incident. Their expressions shifted again, now filled with fear of legal repercussions rather than confidence in their fake authority. In that moment of vulnerability for them, I felt empowered, not just for myself, but for every homeowner who might have faced similar intimidation tactics without knowing how to fight back. This confrontation wasn't merely personal. It represented a stand against all forms of exploitation masquerading as authority. As they backed away slowly from my porch, it became evident that their plan had unraveled completely. They weren't just leaving empty-handed. They were leaving exposed and defeated, witnesses to the power of truth and integrity over deception and fear. I watched them retreat with satisfaction as they realized that true authority comes not from fake badges or threats, but from standing firm in one's rights and refusing to bow down to those who misuse power for personal gain. The turning point had come. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions in a world where justice would prevail, and I would ensure it did. As the two HOA board members retreated from my porch, their faces still etched with disbelief and fear, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The confrontation had come to an end, but the aftermath was just beginning. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was an opportunity to ensure that their fraudulent tactics wouldn't continue to harm others in the community. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the reality of what had just transpired. The adrenaline that had propelled me through the confrontation began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of duty. I knew I couldn't let this incident go unreported. It was crucial not only for my own peace of mind, but for the protection of other homeowners who might find themselves facing similar intimidation tactics. After closing the door behind me, I made my way to my home office, where I began documenting everything that had happened. I noted the time, the names they had used, their descriptions, and every detail I could remember about their behavior during our encounter. Writing it all down served two purposes. It helped me process the event while also preparing me for what lay ahead. Once my account was complete, I picked up the phone and called the local police department. When I explained the situation, emphasizing that I was a federal agent and detailing the fraudulent activities of these HOA board members, I could hear the operator's interest peaking on the other end. "This is serious," she said, taking down the information with urgency. She assured me that they would look into it immediately. Within days, officers were dispatched to investigate further. They interviewed neighbors and gathered evidence regarding this so-called HOA's operations. What I had uncovered was merely the tip of the iceberg. It turned out that these two individuals were part of a larger scheme targeting unsuspecting residents throughout our community, many of whom were elderly or otherwise vulnerable. As news spread about what had happened to me, other victims began coming forward with their own stories. It was both heartening and disheartening to hear how many people had been affected by similar tactics. Some had paid fines they didn't owe, others had been threatened with legal action for non-existent violations. Each story reinforced my resolve to ensure accountability. The fallout from my confrontation continued to ripple through our neighborhood as more people learned what had transpired. Many residents expressed gratitude for my actions, thanking me for standing up against intimidation and fraud. It became clear that this wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a larger narrative about how power can be misused when unchecked. I felt a renewed sense of purpose as I engaged with community members, holding meetings to raise awareness about scams like those perpetrated by the HOA board members. We discussed strategies for recognizing and reporting fraudulent behavior and shared resources on homeowners' rights. It was empowering to see others take an active role in protecting themselves and their neighbors. In time, media outlets picked up on the story as well, highlighting both my experience as a federal agent and the broader issue of homeowner scams plaguing communities across the country. Suddenly, there was a spotlight on this problem that many had brushed aside or accepted as part of living in a homeowners association. The investigation eventually led law enforcement to uncover additional fraudulent activities linked to those board members and even resulted in criminal charges against them for their actions. The relief felt by those who had been victimized was palpable as justice began to unfold, a testament to the impact one individual can have when they refuse to be intimidated. Reflecting on this entire experience, I recognized that standing up against deceit not only protected me but also empowered an entire community. It reinforced my belief in justice and reminded me why I had chosen a career in law enforcement in the first place, to advocate for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. The aftermath brought more than just closure. It sparked conversations about integrity within community organizations and the importance of vigilance among residents. My encounter at that doorstep became a catalyst for change, not just in my own life, but in the lives of many others who now understood that they too could stand up against fraudulent authority. I realized then that sometimes confronting fear head-on can lead to unexpected outcomes, outcomes that transcend personal victories and impact entire communities for the better. The confrontation at my door was just one instance in a larger tapestry of issues surrounding homeowners associations and the potential for abuse of power. While my personal experience was shocking, it served as a critical reminder of the broader implications that such scams can have on communities as a whole. This incident opened up discussions not only about individual rights, but also about systemic vulnerabilities that exist within homeowners, associations, and similar organizations. First and foremost, the incident highlighted the alarming frequency with which scammers target innocent homeowners. Many residents, especially those who are elderly or less informed about their rights, can become easy prey for individuals who wield false authority. The tactics employed by the HOA members at my door, intimidation, scare tactics, and threats, are not unique to this situation. They reflect a disturbing pattern seen across various communities. With inadequate oversight of HOA operations, unscrupulous individuals can exploit the trust placed in them by residents. Moreover, this event underscored the essential need for education and awareness within communities. Too often, homeowners remain unaware of their rights or the regulations governing their associations. Many do not know how to report fraudulent behavior or even recognize it when it occurs. My experience prompted me to advocate for increased transparency within homeowners, associations, and community organizations. Residents should be empowered with knowledge about what constitutes legitimate authority and how to assert their rights when confronted by false claims. The implications extend beyond individual households. They touch upon community solidarity as well. By sharing my story and encouraging others to speak out against intimidation and fraud, I helped foster an environment where residents felt empowered to unite against unscrupulous tactics. The more we talk about these issues, the more we strengthen our communities against exploitation. When neighbors stand together to protect one another, we create a culture that discourages scams and fosters accountability. This situation also raised important questions about regulation and oversight of homeowners, associations themselves. How can residents ensure that those in positions of power are held accountable? The lack of proper checks and balances can allow for abuses that go unchecked for far too long. Communities must advocate for more stringent regulations governing HOA operations, including clear guidelines on how board members should conduct themselves and what protocols they must follow when addressing violations. Another significant aspect to consider is how this incident reflects a larger national trend regarding the misuse of authority in various contexts, much like what we see in other areas where power structures become corrupt. The tactics used by the HOA board members mirror those employed by fraudsters and con artists in various sectors, from telemarketing scams to fake government officials demanding payment for non-existent fines. This pattern suggests that society must remain vigilant against all forms of deception aimed at exploiting fear. Furthermore, the conversation around these issues has broader societal implications as well. In an era where misinformation spreads quickly through social media and other platforms, it becomes increasingly critical for individuals to verify claims made by those in positions of authority. Trust is an essential component of community living. When that trust is broken through deceitful actions, it undermines the very fabric of society. Ultimately, my confrontation with the HOA scammers became more than just a personal victory. It evolved into a catalyst for change within my community, a reminder that individuals have the power to challenge wrongdoing and advocate for justice. It served as an example of how one person's resolve can spark important conversations about integrity, authority, and collective responsibility. As I engaged with neighbors in discussions about their experiences with homeowners, associations, I witnessed how a single story could resonate widely, inspiring others to share their own tales of intimidation or manipulation. The aftermath became a rallying cry for vigilance against fraud, an opportunity to educate ourselves and others about our rights while fostering a sense of community empowerment. In reflecting on these broader implications, it became clear that standing up against wrongdoing is not merely an individual act. It is a collective effort that requires awareness, education, and unity among all residents. By confronting scams head-on and advocating for justice, we can create an environment where integrity prevails over deception, a world where individuals no longer feel powerless in the face of fraudulent authority, but instead stand strong together against it. As I reflect on the events that unfolded that day, I'm struck by the profound lessons learned through a confrontation that began with intimidation, but ultimately ended in empowerment. The experience not only reinforced my understanding of authority and the potential for its abuse, but also illuminated the importance of standing firm in the face of deception. When those HOA board members knocked on my door, they expected to find an easy target, someone who would cower under pressure and submit to their demands without question. What they encountered instead was a federal agent with years of experience recognizing scams. That day became a testament to the power of knowledge and awareness, highlighting how crucial it is to be informed about one's rights and responsibilities. It's a reminder that knowledge can serve as a shield against exploitation. One of the most striking reflections from this experience is the realization that the tactics used by scammers often thrive on fear and misinformation. Those board members attempted to manipulate me by using intimidation as their weapon, but they underestimated my resolve and experience. Their actions were not just an affront to me personally. They represented a broader issue affecting many within our community, individuals who might not have the same resources or knowledge to stand up against such tactics. This incident prompted me to think about the many vulnerable community members who could easily fall prey to similar scams. It is a sobering thought that there are countless individuals out there who may feel powerless in the face of authority, whether it be from an HOA, a landlord, or any organization wielding perceived power. By sharing my story and advocating for vigilance against fraud, I hope to empower others to speak out and assert their rights. The aftermath of this confrontation was equally revealing. It sparked important conversations within my community about awareness, education, and advocacy. Neighbors came forward with their own stories of intimidation, which helped us collectively confront these issues head-on. This ripple effect underscored a vital truth. When we stand together and share our experiences, we create an environment where deceit has no place to thrive. My experience also served as a reminder of the importance of accountability in all organizations, especially those governed by homeowners associations. The lack of oversight in these groups can lead to abuses that go unchecked for far too long. As I engaged with my neighbors, we discussed ways to enhance transparency within our HOA and advocated for clearer guidelines about how board members should operate. It became evident that change could come not just from individual actions, but from collective advocacy for better governance. In reflecting on what occurred at my doorstep, I felt a renewed commitment to justice, not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever felt intimidated or silenced by false authority. This confrontation reinforced my belief that integrity must prevail over deception, and that standing up for what is right is essential in every aspect of life. Looking back on everything now, I realize how pivotal this experience was in shaping my perspective on authority and responsibility. It was no longer just about confronting two individuals who had tried to exploit me. It became about recognizing systemic issues that affect communities at large. Each person has a role to play in safeguarding against fraud and ensuring that power is not abused. As I engage with others about these topics, I encourage everyone to remain vigilant and proactive when confronted with situations that seem suspicious or coercive. By fostering an environment where questions are welcomed and spoken concerns are taken seriously, we can dismantle the fear that scammers rely upon. Ultimately, this journey has been transformative, not just for me, but for many others who are now more aware of their rights and empowered to challenge wrongdoing. As we continue to advocate for integrity within our communities, let this experience serve as a powerful reminder. Standing up against deception is not merely an act of defiance. It is an essential duty we owe ourselves and each other. In closing, I hope my story encourages others to speak out when faced with intimidation and manipulation. When we refuse to be silent in the face of wrongdoing, we pave the way for a society built on trust, respect, and accountability. A society where everyone knows their rights and stands ready to defend them. Together, we can create communities where integrity flourishes and exploitation has no foothold, a world where authority is earned through respect rather than fright tactics.